Hello everyone, Stephen with Renewed Ministries. Today we're going to take a look at the third most Googled query on what does the Bible say. When you start typing in what does the Bible say in Google, the third thing that pops up is what does the Bible say about divorce. Stick around, let's look at the Bible together. The topic of divorce is so important in the Bible that Jesus addressed it without being prompted at his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. To me, this means that in the biblical times, the divorce was occurring in such a way that it was not congruent with the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's why he addressed it. It's still an issue in the modern church today. People simply like to quit on each other. The numbers bear that out. You can look through any number of studies and see that divorce rates and causes and issues within marriage are almost identical among those that claim to be Christians as it is among those in the world. Biblically speaking, and that's what we're going to address today, there are actually three reasons that I can find that gives you biblical grounds for divorce. Before we get into those, can I ask you, go ahead and click the like button, click subscribe on the channel so you can stay up to date with what we're doing. But also I'm going to link, it's either here, one of the upper corners there, to the other videos in this series on what the Bible says. I've done one on what does the Bible say about tattoos and also one on what does the Bible say about cremation. Today, thank you for sticking around, but let's take a look at what the Bible says about divorce. Really, we've got three A's of divorce in the Bible. The first is adultery. This is obvious, I believe, and in fact, it's the first and only way in which Jesus addresses divorce. As I told you in the Sermon on the Mount, he said that whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement, is what had been said in old. But Jesus said to him that if you put away your wife, saving for the cause of fornication, you cause her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced also commits adultery. And that is still the truth. Jesus went on in Matthew 19 to address this. He had finished some sayings. He went from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and the large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Now, I think that part's significant in that Jesus was doing the work of the Father, and things were really moving there. And things were happening. And when things started happening, it was then all of a sudden that the Pharisees wanted to come up and start trying to cause issue and find reasons to cause division. That still happens today to my pastor friends, preacher friends. Be careful of that very thing that still goes on. Even to those of you that are in the pew, those that are saved and just beginning your journey, just pay attention. When God does something really good is when someone's going to come up and start asking questions that should be irrelevant. Here Jesus is in a crowd. He's already given his Sermon on the Mount, and and he's moving. Miracles are happening, and the Pharisees come up to him, and they tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Now here's the way Jesus answered. He said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. They said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her away? And he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Here's the simple answer. When your spouse is guilty of adultery, you have no obligation to continue your end of the covenant agreement. The words used for divorce, both in the Old Testament and New Testament, are almost identical in meaning. And there's three separate words. One carries a connotation, both Hebrew and Greek, of being sent away. Another one carries the connotation of you actually leaving. Or there's another word that pertains to the legal certificate of divorce. Here's the short answer for adultery, the actions of someone abandoning the covenant agreement of exclusivity of love to each other, is biblical grounds for you to break your covenant agreement with that person permanently. In other words, if they commit adultery, you have no obligation to stay because they have abandoned their end of the agreement. I think that's a theme you'll also see in the remaining two causes, that theme of abandoning what they have been committed to. Matter of fact, in 1 Corinthians 7:10 through 16, you have this: to the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of the wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Let me put that in plain English. If you are married to an unbeliever, and this can happen, not just being unequally yoked from the beginning, I'll talk about that in a moment, but oftentimes in marriage, you will get married as unbelievers, and one will come to know the Lord, one will get saved, and then later on the other will. That was the case for my wife and I. She was truly committed to the Lord far before I was, and she stayed, and ultimately I became saved also. And that probably would not have been the case had she left. And I believe that's the type of situation Paul is addressing here. We were both willing to stay in the marriage, even though she was a believer, and for a season I was not. But if the unbelieving partner separates, then the believing partner, the remaining believer, has no obligation to stay in the covenant agreement. Because, again, here's that theme of abandonment. When the spouse abandons their end of the covenant, the other spouse has no obligation to stay. So if you have adultery, if you have abandonment, then you have the right to leave. But I believe the same also goes for abuse, because that is also an abandonment of the covenant agreement. Look at Ephesians 5, verses 25 through 29. It says, husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. If you are not fulfilling that part of your covenant agreement, then you have abandoned your spouse, and they, in fact, should leave immediately. There's no need to stay in an abusive relationship. Multiple times we are warned against abuse throughout the Bible, particularly over those whom are weaker, poorer, or in less of a position of defense. You can see Isaiah chapter 3, verses 14 through 15, Amos 2:7, Mark 9:42, and other places. We are not called to abuse or to lord over or to oppress, but rather we are called to nurture and cherish and love our spouse as we love ourselves. The marriage covenant is no different. When you abandon one end, then the other party has no obligation to remain. And as I stated, in fact, in this case of abuse, they should leave immediately. So one more case let's take a look at would be the case of a deceased spouse. Now, this isn't divorce, but I believe that it is necessary in this place, because if you remarry after a divorce for a biblical reason, then it is fine. It's right, it's good, it's legal in the eyes of the Lord and of the law. And if you're a widow or widower, then I believe it is also good to be remarried. 1 Corinthians 7:39 says, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Men, the same goes for us. We're bound to our wife as long as we are living, but if she has passed on, then we are free to be married to whom we wish, but only in the Lord. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14. We need to make sure that we are equally yoked with whomever we are married. We need to make sure if we're a believer, they need to be a believer. If we're Pentecostal, they need to be Pentecostal. If we're Baptist, they need to be Baptist. If we're Methodist, they need to be Methodist. I believe that with everything in me. I know we're all going to the same heaven. There's good Methodist, there's good Baptist. I am a Pentecostal. But you don't need the extra stresses on marriage. Extra stresses on marriage leads to unbiblical divorce, because no one wants to live in an unpeaceful situation. And if you remember back to verse 15 in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the end of that verse says, God has called you to peace. You don't need to unnecessarily place yourself in an unpeaceful situation. But at the end of the day, the only reasons for biblical divorce would be for adultery, abandonment, and abuse. And I believe I have showed you scripturally that today. So that, friend, is what the Bible has to say about divorce. Pray everyone has a blessed day today. Check out the links here at the end of the video. Hope this has answered your question. Keep a lookout for the next video on what does the Bible say about.